Chapter 22. Angelica Sterling smiled as she walked from the stove back to Jonathan Knight. He strained against the thick leather straps that fastened his wrists and ankles to the table. He longed to have the soul key back in his possession, but its mirrored surface reflected the orange flickering light of the stove and the candles from a table well beyond his reach. He took a deep breath and focused on his surroundings and closed his eyes. Though he was not able to enter the mind realm, he did have experience and training for dealing with difficult situations that he had received before he had found the divine key. Kirana Sepharvaim had reluctantly agreed to help him improve his skills at Sig's request. At first, the training had been extremely difficult, though his feelings toward her had blocked out most of the negative memories regarding his training. Repeated punishment from kicks and the wooden sticks that they used in his sword training had helped him learn to keep his wits under stress or pain. The memories of his training sessions came flooding back to him as Angelica approached. "If your opponent raises their fist, strike it," Kirana had shouted. The general idea behind the strategy was to prevent the opponent from being able to pull off powerful attacks and to parry and counter quick attacks. Speed and agility were natural traits in Kirana, and they had helped her survive in the ice fortress during the occupation by the ruthless fire demon worshippers. These traits had not come as naturally to Jonathan. He had survived in the deserts using traps and with the aid of his red-tailed hawk, Sam. He had mentioned some of the things that he and Sam had done to try and impress Kirana, but she had never seemed interested. "We aren't hawks," Kirana had said. "We're humans. You aren't in the hot zone anymore." A person that was thinking rationally might have recognized the lack of patience and compassion, but Jonathan had assumed she was just trying to help him focus on his present circumstances for training purposes. He was hopelessly in love with her. It had not taken her long to realize this, but she gave it little thought at first. Over time, the training had become more advanced. They had acquired a pair of swords from some augments in the temperate zone and given them to Jonathan. Slowly, and in spite of her cold exterior, Kirana began to admire Jonathan's persistence and courage. While most of his attempts to impress her were not as successful as he had aspired, eventually his diligence proved that he had more than an adolescent infatuation with her. He put her before himself in everything. It had reminded her of her father. As he learned to react efficiently to the movements of the augments and demon worshippers that they had hunted, she had found herself attracted to him. The feeling had frightened her, and she had been determined to bottle her emotions up so that she could avoid having to feel the bitterness of loss that she had felt when her father had died. Of course, Jonathan was unaware of her motives during those times. He thought it was just additional training she had been offering when she had told him that his feelings could be used against him. "You can't go around with that smile on your face all the time," she had said. "But Sig does," he had replied. She had been upset at his reasoning for a few moments, but had eventually responded to him. "You of all people know what demon worshippers do when they know you care about someone," Kirana had said. "What they did to your hawk? Sam, was it?" The memory of his winged companion had stunned him silent, but he had nodded. "I think you've trained long enough that even if you were to be caught by an augment or demon worshipper, you probably could handle what they threw directly at you," Kirana had said. "But what if they also had Sig, or Daniel, or Lucas, or me?" "They'll never get you, Kirana," Jonathan had said with a confident smile. "What if they did?" Kirana had said. "What would you do?" Jonathan had been silent for a while. "I don't know," he had said at last. "Try not to let them know that I'm your friend," Kirana had said. "Right," Jonathan had replied. "They hurt things they know you care about." "That's exactly right," Kirana had said. "Don't let anyone know what or who you care about." Jonathan had thought about it for a few moments. "Yeah, I don't think I can hide that," Jonathan had said. "What do I do when they inevitably find out?" Jonathan had regretted saying that when he saw the look of frustration on Kirana's face. Well, truthfully, Kirana had finally said, the same training that works with swords works with everything else. Don't get intimidated. Look at your surroundings. Watch your opponent's movements. Find an opportunity to strike the raised fist. As Angelica Sterling pulled Jonathan's face toward her, his focus left the memories of his training with Kirana and returned to his surroundings. "It's her, isn't it?" guessed Angelica. Jonathan knew that she was referring to Kirana. "She's the reason you don't want to be with me." He tried to clear his mind and ignore the question, but his attempts to focus his thoughts seemed to confirm to Angelica that she had been correct. "I'll give you that she's pretty," said Angelica as she turned to face her, "but I doubt she's as adventurous as I am." The way she said the word adventurous filled Jonathan with a mixture of anger and shock. His cheeks turned red as Angelica turned back to face him. "And one other thing," added Angelica, "no one is very pretty when they're being tortured." She laughed softly as she walked back toward the stove. Jonathan clenched his fists and began twisting his arms and legs as much as he could to try and loosen the restraints. He knew that there would be no opportunity to strike while he was bound. Angelica chuckled as he grunted in exertion. She drew the first brand out of the stove. The metal at the end of the brand had a low orange glow. She swung it up into the air like a torch and walked toward Kirana. Though Jonathan had closed his eyes in an attempt to focus on pulling his limbs through the straps that fastened them to the table, she swung her hips seductively as she approached her dark-haired victim. "Stop it!" shrieked Jonathan. Nothing in his training had prepared him for the feeling of despair and helplessness that filled his heart. The sound of his voice made Kirana stir slightly. "Jonathan?" she whispered. Angelica laughed and slapped her face. Kirana shook her head and quickly realized she had been restrained. She yanked her limbs and squirmed around, but her wrists and ankles were firmly bound. She suddenly looked up and saw Jonathan violently straining against his bonds. "Good morning," said Angelica in a pleasant tone. She took hold of Kirana's collar and ripped her t-shirt, exposing her bare back. "Maybe you can help me. I want you to tell your boyfriend that he should use his soul key to take care of a security problem I have." "What's this?" laughed Kirana. "A fire demon worshipper is reduced to begging for help from divine key bearers." Angelica's expression turned angry. She jammed the hot brand against Kirana's back. Kirana shrieked in pain. "Kirana!" shouted Jonathan. The noise caused Lucas to stir from his unconsciousness. "Kirana?" muttered Lucas. He quickly realized his wrists and ankles were bound. His eyes widened as he focused on his surroundings. Jonathan and Kirana quieted down and looked to him, not wanting to interrupt his thought process. "You're in luck, kid," said Angelica in a patronizing tone as she pulled the brand off of Kirana's back. The scent of burning flesh would have sickened most people, but it only made Lucas angry. His expression surprised the demon master. "You seem a bit upset," said Angelica. "You probably don't understand. It could just as easily have been you getting the irons instead of Jonathan's girlfriend. I just don't think you will be as motivating." "Motivating for what?" asked Lucas. His brow was still furrowed and his fists were clenched, but his voice was as calm as the small glowing flames on the red candles throughout the chamber. "What is it you are trying to do?" Angelica cleared her throat and shook her head slightly, causing her red ponytail to sway. "Do you have any ideas for dealing with a controlled demon?" she asked at last, assuming that posing a question would distract Lucas and allow her to return to her task. "Maybe you could ambush them, knock them out, and strap them to a table," said Lucas. "Seems to be a good strategy for you." "I don't expect you to understand," said Angelica with a soft laugh. She tossed the iron brand onto the ground. It produced a loud clanking sound as it struck the floor and bounced a couple times. She retrieved another brand. "On the other hand," said Lucas, "if you keep doing the same thing over and over again, you increase the odds that someone will find and exploit a weakness in your routine." "Well, you certainly have a large vocabulary," laughed Angelica. "You are still assuming that you are more intelligent than I am," said Lucas in a calm tone. Angelica flashed an angry look toward him as she perceived his implication. "You are a child," said Angelica angrily. "I am more intelligent than you are." "Does my age make your inferiority more embarrassing?" asked Lucas. She threw the brand into the stove and smiled. Lucas's use of the word inferiority had struck a nerve. Jonathan's eyes widened as she approached Lucas. "I am so sorry," said Angelica. "I probably gave you the wrong idea when I told you that you were in luck. It doesn't mean that you will be spared." She pinched his cheeks together and pulled his face up so that he could see the sincerity in her wide eyes. "I am still going to kill you," said Angelica in a low voice with an unnaturally wide smile. "If you can figure out how to watch your mouth, it will be quick with a blade. If you can't, it will be slow with brands." She threw his face against the table. The pain stunned Lucas for a moment, but he quickly shook off the pain. "You fire demon worshippers and your brands," said Lucas. "You probably don't even know what the runes you burn into the backs of your victims say." Angelica slapped Lucas's face in anger. After a moment, she burst out laughing. "All right," said Angelica with a smile. "You want to prove you're smart? What do the runes say?" Lucas cleared his throat and recited a poem. "Demon, hear and understand the cries of pain, the searing brand. With victim flesh for me anew, thy strength with my black key imbue. This sacrifice for me do toil, I bid its flowing blood to boil." Angelica opened her mouth to say something, but nothing came out. Finally Lucas spoke. "You were wondering how I would know because I got it right," said Lucas, "and then you will ask yourself whether I actually might know something that could help you against your mind-controlled demon worshipper friend." Angelica smiled. "So, do you?" she asked. "Of course I do, you idiot!" shouted Lucas. Angelica took a deep breath to try to keep her cool. After a moment of silence, she became frustrated that Lucas was not elaborating on his statement. "And?" she prompted. "And I might be willing to help you," said Lucas. "Lucas?" said Jonathan in shock. His surprise brought a smile to Angelica's face. "I need the following things, though," said Lucas. "First, you will release all three of us and return our clothing and property. Second, you will provide us with 10 million credits." 10 million credits? Laughed Angelica. "Where would you get the idea?" "I know about your crimes in Dallas," interrupted Lucas. Angelica stopped laughing and put her hands on her hips. "Third, I want one of your stolen FSA tanks. Also, and this is important, I want it up front." "So let me get this straight," said Angelica. "You want me to set you free, give you an exorbitant amount of money, give you secure transportation, and then just hope that you will then help me out?" "I knew you were stupid, but I thought you would understand my requests," said Lucas in a demeaning tone. "Setting us free means removing our restraints. We're tied to these things called tables." "Of course," said Angelica with a grin. She reached to the stove, pulled out the hot iron, and jammed it into Lucas's bare back. He screamed in agony. "Stop it!" shouted Jonathan. He had hoped that Lucas would have a plan. The typically level-headed mastermind appeared to have lost sight of the goal of escaping in favor of cheap posturing and taunting. It made no sense to Jonathan that he would do that. unless it was to distract from something else. He reviewed in his mind all of the things that Lucas had said. He recalled the taunts about Angelica being a fool. He thought about the horrific verse, and wondered if there might have been a message hidden in it, or a signal that he should have received. He could only remember the line, "Bid its flowing blood to boil," as it caused chills to go up his spine. He focused on the demands that Lucas made. 10 million credits seemed unrealistic to Angelica, but if it were some sort of code or signal, he could not figure out what the number 10 million meant. The clarification about Dallas meant nothing to Jonathan. He had never heard of such a place. "Well, Jonathan Knight," said Angelica as she retrieved another heated brand from the stove, "I suppose I can't call your friend stupid. This child forces me to recognize that he is aware of more than many adults. Unfortunately, it's more than just knowledge that makes a person truly fit." She jammed the heated metal against Lucas's back again. He screamed. "Please leave him alone," said Jonathan. "All right," said Angelica with a shrug. She turned to Kirana and jammed the metal against her back. She shrieked. Suddenly it occurred to Jonathan that Lucas might not have had any big-picture plans. He might have simply been trying to taunt the enemy to give his friends a reprieve from the torture of the Demon Master. Jonathan found similar motivation as he watched Kirana clench her fists in excruciating pain. "Stop it! Stop it!" screamed Jonathan. "Tell me what you want me to do." "Not that," said Kirana as she glared at Jonathan angrily. Jonathan regretted his words. "Of course she wants it to stop," laughed Angelica. "And it can. You just need to help me, Jonathan." "Heh," shouted Kirana boldly. "You're even dumber than the kid if you think that Jonathan will help you." The way that she stressed her words gave Jonathan a clear message that she did not want him to help the demon worshipper, even if it meant she suffered more pain. He pressed his fingernails into his palms, hoping the pain would help him to focus. He thought about what Lucas had said again. One of Lucas's phrases came back to his memory. "If you keep doing the same thing over and over again, you increase the odds that someone will find and exploit a weakness in your routine." The only thing that she was doing consistently over and over again was heating brands and pressing them into the flesh of his friends, but that did not seem like the sort of thing that could be exploited. "Oh, please," said Angelica. "Of course he won't be able to bear the sight of your pretty little face all contorted up while I brand you." "I don't know," said Kirana. "How long has he had to look at your ugly face? Because that's a far worse torture." "You nasty little," thundered Angelica as she grabbed another brand. "Hang on," said Jonathan, hoping to temper the wrath of the Demon Master. She seemed barely aware that Jonathan was present anymore as she stirred the brands in the fire of the stove. "I've seen goats that look more feminine than you," taunted Kirana. "I'm going to burn your face off," shouted Angelica. "Just burn my eyes out," shouted Kirana, "so that I don't have to look at you anymore. You'll be doing me a service." Angelica picked up a brand from the stove and pointed her index finger toward the end. "I'm going to make you beg me for death, you stupid little," started Angelica as flames burst from her fingertip and bathed the iron she held. Jonathan caught a glimpse of Lucas smiling, which caught him off guard. He wondered what he possibly had planned that could help them out of their predicament. Of course, without the soul key, Jonathan had no way of knowing that Lucas had placed some explosive inside the ornate iron shaft of one of the irons before he and Kirana had been brought into the room. There was a loud noise, a bright light, and a blast of expanding air that knocked Jonathan's head against the table, knocking him unconscious.